Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend and coach, John Opalewski. How are you today, John?
Hey Jim, I'm doing good. It's nice to be with you and excited about the launch of a three-part series
Yeah,
of podcasts entitled Staffing Your Church from Within.
from within.
Most of the ideas, somebody asked me the other day, John, where do you get all the ideas for the podcast? And I said, most of them come from our customers, our clients.
Yeah,
We just listen. They kind of tell us what's really going on in their world. And if we hear multiples of the same thing, over a short period of time, we think, maybe we should spend some time there. And that's really the
yeah,
genesis of this three-part series. We've had a lot of pastors over the last month report to us they're trying to add staff to their
yeah,
team. They have the budget for it, but they are finding the talent pool shallow. And some of our friends that we help have been trying for 18 months, Jim, to
wow.
fill
Oh
a
my goodness.
position with no movement.
Wow.
And so the thought comes to me, hey, we've got a guy on our team, and he actually happens to be on this podcast with Jim Wiegand, who has really done just one of the, I don't even know how to put the adjective to it, Jim, just one of the best jobs I've ever seen a church do of building and staffing from within. I think what I'd like to do today and then next week, Jim, is to have you share. I'm going to interview you the next 2 weeks with our audience. Have you share,
Yeah,
how that worked at Freedom Center, and I believe this. Um, I don't think we're talking about some future trend here. I think it is here
yeah.
and it is a reality. Does that mean in 20 years that the talent pool outside your church won't be deeper than it is today? I have no idea. It could be, but here and now, the steady drumbeat is
Yeah.
I can't find staff, and we're limping along while we're trying to find. I'm looking everywhere and trying everything. And here we have, I think, perhaps a solution to that
Yeah.
nagging issue. So, Jim, thank you for letting us flip roles for the next couple of
Yeah,
weeks.
my pleasure. I mean, this is my favorite thing to talk about is really what we're talking about is discipleship. But, more than that, what disciples do. So thanks for taking the time to talk about this today.
So, Jim, where did you come up with this idea of
Yeah.
building from within, staffing from within?
Yeah, it's funny. My mom has a statement. She says I was born again breech. I didn't come out head first. I experienced salvation at a rock concert. A guy in spandex pants and a Mr. T starter kit with a wife beater T-shirt on led me to Jesus. So that was an unorthodox beginning. It wasn't a mental ascent through doctrinal discernment. I just met Jesus, and in an instantaneous miracle of faith, I trusted him, and that began the process of learning that he trusts me. That led me to prepare for ministry, not in Bible school, because I don't really. The kind of the joke is I don't suffer from ADHD, but the people around me often suffer from my ADHD. So the thought of me being in a classroom setting for years learning the hermeneutics of Lucan historiography was just really out of bounds for me. I just would not have had the discipline to do that. But I found a program in Phoenix through my pastor called the Master's Commission. We have a form of it now in Fenton called the Freedom Center Academy, and it's basically a trade school. It's if you don't learn how to weld, you weld. You don't learn the history of French poetry. You learn welding. So I wanted to learn ministry. So all morning I was in scripture, in prayer, memorizing, and then in the afternoons I was in the nursing homes, on the bus routes, on the street, homeless shelters, the jails, doing what I learned that morning in the streets that afternoon. And what was neat about Phoenix First Assembly was our pastor, Tommy Barnett, just said, there's a miracle in the house. That was one of his famous sermons. There's a miracle in the house. It's, when God wanted to impress Pharaoh, he asked Moses what was in his hand. The
Mm-hmm.
the multiplying of the oil with the widow's jars. What do you have? How many oils? How many jars? Go get some more jars, just empty jars, or loaves and fish. That was kind of the philosophy. Was everybody has greatness inside of them. It's our job to figure out what that is and then put them in environments that make sense. So I took that with me into youth ministry. I just believed that every young person, every, pimply junior high school bionic squirrel kid, was the next Albert Einstein or the next Apostle Paul. And because I didn't know any better, I just thought everybody in ministry, I thought that my ministry was to define and develop their ministry. I didn't know that they weren't there to build my ministry. I was actually there to build theirs. And so we started asking the right questions. Like, 10 years from now, I run into you at the mall and I say, what are you doing? And you say, Jim, I'm living the life of my dreams. I was just say, tell me about that. What is the life of your dreams 10 years from now? And sometimes we're like, I'm going to be an orthodontist. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to be a missionary. But sometimes, most of the time, this is, I don't know. I mean, 10 years into the future, like look 10 years into the past, I'm in kindergarten raising my hand to go to the bathroom. And you're asking me what I'm going to be 10 years from now. So we had to come up with good questions that help these students develop, define, refine what they believe God wanted them to do with their lives. So that's where it came from. So
it's interesting that the genesis for you was actually with kids and fascinating to me. Like, did that actually work?
Tell me
a little bit about the fruit of that.
It's funny. One of the things that we do accidentally is we indoctrinate. This is our tradition. This is our history. These are our doctrines. This is our sacred truth. We like those things to the place where everybody should know them. And by the way, I like those things to the place where I want everybody to know them. But not everybody's interested in what we're interested in for them. Right. Not every student in an algebra class cares about math. Not every student in a history class cares about, the War of 1812. It takes a passionate teacher sometimes to teach a reluctant student, and not everybody's a passionate teacher. But I don't know if you ever are in an awkward situation where you're meeting people for the first time, ask them about themselves, because they feel like they're an expert in the subject. They don't mind being cared about, concerned about. So right. This is the foundation of our youth ministry. Was we care about you. What did God create you to be? This is part of our foundational truth at Ephesians 2:10, that we're God's workmanship. We're created in Christ Jesus to do good works that God prepared in advance for us to do. So believing that there's gold inside of everybody because the master has entrusted talents, weights and measurements and units of wealth, his wealth inside of us. Understanding what that is so we can put it to work is integral. So our youth group's name was the Mud Club, MUD. We were the Missionaries Under Development. Sounds so corny now, but it was so hip back in the day, So
I'm sure it was.
Oh yeah. Our mascot was a dancing hippo with a tutu on it. That's how cool we were. We repelled the A students, But everybody, we had this philosophy, like, what are you supposed to be? So we had kids, our kids grew up to be missionaries, pastors. One became a messianic rabbi, entrepreneurs. Not all of them made it. I'm not trying to say and they all are serving Christ today, but we did ask them what they wanted to be when they grew up. And that was an important part of the process. And I can say 80% of them are now the housewife they dreamed of being, the mother they dreamed of being, the entrepreneur they dreamed of being. Men and women are in ministry today because when they were 14, 15 years old, on a ski lift in the Apache White Mountains in Arizona, I said, 10 years from now, I run into you at the mall. And we started down that track, And I think my job as a youth pastor was whatever they were interested in, I needed to become interested in. So if they're interested in orthodontics, I need to find out about orthodontics so I need to introduce them to a believing orthodontics person to be a role model and example. My ministry was to help them discover what their ministry was and then release them into that as adults.
Yeah, and I love that. One of my early mentors as a leader said, John, look, and I was in youth ministry at the time. He says, you need to be a resource person to these kids.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, I never thought about that that way, but he's so right. And in a way, when he told me that, Jim, it took a lot of the pressure off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't have to know everything about everything. I just need to know how to resource kids, and the way you did it is so amazing. Well, then you come to Fenton, and as a lead pastor, tell us about that experience in terms of how did that translate to Fenton?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
As it turns out, 15-year-olds aren't the only people that don't know what they're supposed to be doing with their lives.
Mm.
And
Amen
where
to
I
that.
live, there's a lot of people, and by this I mean my heroes, excellent, wonderful people who make a sacrificial choice to go into a work they don't enjoy to supply and support a family that they love. So this is not a demeaning, word on those who would work in factories or manual labor. I'm not saying that at all. But it was interesting to note that a lot of people, as the factories were closing down or moving out, the economy, especially in the kind of the late early 2000s, the 2009s and so forth, a lot of people laid off, no jobs, no work, and people being bought out of their contracts. And they got to ask themselves, now that I'm done doing what I have to do, what is it that I really want to do? I can't go back to doing what I have to do. And for the first time in my life, as a mature grown up, I'm not saying, how do I make money because I got my girlfriend pregnant and I need to buy a house and all that stuff. They're saying, okay, my kids are in their teens and I have the right now to ask, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And so we came here in 1995 and we started asking questions of people, and maybe you can envision the people I'm talking about, but the poor lady that's been relegated to the nursery for the last 12 years that has no help and no one else is taking that role. She doesn't really love it. But if she leaves that role, she knows there'll be no nursery at her church. That person who's been working with the youth or playing the piano, we had a lot of that here. There's about 100 people when we came, but we had 18 different classrooms. Each one demanded at least 2 teachers in it. So in other words, every adult had to be a Sunday school teacher or a Royal Rangers leader or a missionette leader. We had a lot of people doing what they were not called to do, weren't gifted to do. I mean, trust me, they were not good at it, but they were told that if you love Jesus, you have to come here and serve. And there's some truth to that, but there's a better truth than that. There is some truth to that, but there's a better truth than that. So when I came in and said, what do you want to do? They said, well, it doesn't matter what I want to do. What do you need me to do? Like, I need you to tell me what God created you to be. I need you to give me clues. I need you to tell me the narrative of your heart. I need you to close your eyes and see a future that's different from today. And tell me what that looks like so that as your pastor, I can help create an environment that makes you make the most sense, where you enjoy coming to it instead of arriving at the last minute, not wanting to be there. And every student you're leading feels that you don't really want to be here, right. or we just don't have that program anymore because we didn't have any people to lead it. That's okay. I think we're responsible to give to the world what we have, but we're not responsible for every program that every denomination wants us to have if we don't have people with that ministry inside of them. So we simplified the menu of what we did, and we only allowed people that wanted to be there, and we gave other people a break. And what was interesting is as we asked them the questions we're going to learn, about their passion, their pain, their proficiency, they found that once they recovered from the spiritual slavery, too strong of words, but pretty close, the mandatory service without compensation, they found that they'd always wanted to do things. Their soul needed to recover a little bit. But then they got to do the things they really wanted to do, and they were great at it. So we grew about 100 people a year for 15 years. And as people came in, our altar workers said, what did God just save you from? And what do you believe he saved you for? And people came to our church from other churches because they moved to the community or left their other church. We said, that's great. What did God save you from? What do you believe God saved you for? And we began to hear these wonderful narratives of just the divine poem of God being written on people's hearts, and trying to create environments for them to start these homeless shelters and these feeding ministries and these special needs ministries. And a lot of ministries people ran from, we had people come here and run towards because God gave them a grace to do it. They wouldn't be happy doing anything else. Yeah.
And so you've told me that your whole staff came from the pews essentially over the last 17 years.
Yeah.
A couple of interesting things you mentioned to me is that everyone is asked to train their replacement every year.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that real quick? Because I could see some people kind of rear up against that one and think if they're insecure, right? Like, what do you mean train my replacement every year? Can you talk to that just a little bit, Jeff?
I think if your ministry has great resource, you can buy a great leader. But how many great resource churches are there? I mean, there aren't many that have $1 million in the bank looking for that top-notch thing. So,
but Jim, even churches with $1 million in a bank
still can't
are struggling to get find help. So it's
Yeah.
yes, I think they have more options, but they're wrestling with it too. So I
Yeah.
want to kind of like just put
Right.
everybody on common ground with us that all churches in some way, shape, or form are probably struggling with this. Maybe not all,
Yeah.
but well, we know for a fact 75% of or 76% of them are.
Yes. That's their number
Lifeway,
one problem. Yeah.
yeah.
Number one
So
thing. Yeah. I can't
almost
find the right
80%
team. Yeah. So
are
let's say
needed.
this. If you can or cannot afford a great leader, understand this. Every great leader came out of a great environment. So maybe instead of looking at great resumes, let's put some effort into building that great environment,
Mm,
right? So we haven't
yeah,
hired anybody off a resume in 17 years. And the majority, 98%, 99% of our staff has come from the pews. They were carpet salesmen and painters and UAW workers. We had a vice president for Hewlett Packard, a variety. We have housewives and brilliant mothers, and I mean the whole group has been people that sat in the pew and then got asked these questions, and then they started down, what Jim Westheim in a couple of weeks is going to call a growth track. Like how do
right.
I go from what I'm doing to what I was created to do that grew into something else? And so when your staff comes from your pews and they're a part of a team, it's funny that insecurity of training my replacement means I'm going to lose my job. It doesn't. If you can train people to do what you do, you get to move in the organization any place you want to go. Like we don't, as the church grows, let me say this: if their ministry is successful, people are a part of that ministry. When people are part
Right.
of that ministry, resource grows. If you're someone who's building people, if you're someone who's finding people's talents and gifts and passions, pains, for efficiencies, discipling them into a place of like vocational ministry, we don't get rid of you. We promote you. You move from staff to senior staff, and someday to
Right.
sit in this chair and be the senior pastor. So the environment of we
Yep.
all came from the pew, we all believe in each other. And I think another thing that we have is, in some ways, is strong language, but we use it, but don't go too far with it. Is everything goes on trial for its life every fall. So September, October, November, we think about the year that's coming up. Every program, every position, every person in that position goes on trial for its life. And we ask, is it working? Would it be better to shift it over here? Is that more in line with this person? We do release people occasionally. It's very rare and almost always for cause. It's not,
Yeah.
you train such a good replacement that you're fired has never happened once. If
Yeah.
you're good at making disciples, because a discipler doesn't make disciples, a discipler makes people who make disciples. So a discipler is not someone who can
Okay.
repeat what I know. A discipler is someone who can do what I've done. So we believe in discipleship. Well, as the base of that ministry grows, the stable height of that ministry grows. So as you reproduce people that are in the base, the height grows. There's always going to be plenty of provision for the people in
Yeah.
the organization. And that's why, when we did run out of room on this staff, we started planting other churches. We started parenting existing congregations. So we now have 5 campuses, all completely funded, all completely staffed by people who hear these 3 questions and respond to them at the most basic level. Far beyond
Yeah.
that's the miracles of God and His grace and His favor. But if you're saying, give me something that I can actually leverage, something I can use, what's the tools?
Yeah.
What's the language? It's what we're talking about today.
I think if you're listening today and this idea that you are training your replacement every year scares you, let me just calm your fears. If you do that well, you will never want for work.
Yes.
You will never want for work. There is going to be opportunity. You'll have more opportunity than what you know to do with. Because there is, you said it. I love it. A discipler is not somebody who makes disciples. He's somebody who makes people who make disciples,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
And there's just I want you to be reassured because you would think that you don't hear a lot of that. We hear a ton of that. Like when we're consulting with churches, and we have this conversation, it's like, well, am I going to work myself out of a job? Yeah, but if your pastor or the person who you report to has any brains at all, he's
Yes.
going to say, I'm not letting go of this guy. I'm going to find something for this person to do.
Yes.
because they've tapped into something that is so beautiful and so powerful. Jim, how
Yeah.
has that process that you've used now in Fenton affected the longevity of your staff? Can you
Yeah.
talk to that?
Yeah. I asked my wife this the other day. She leads the staff. What's the average tenure of a pastor? It's funny. It's somewhere between 10 and 20 years. And this is why not all children's pastors stay children's pastors. So
Mhm.
to say what's the percentage of them that are still in ministry, but they were promoted to church planter. They're promoted to another staff. They started a nonprofit outside of Freedom Center. It's very, very strong. So there are the occasional moments where, the worst happens and we hate that. And we walk people through a process of restoration and all that kind of stuff. But man, the vast majority, they stay because a couple of reasons. If you hire somebody off a resume, chances are they're not from where you are. They have family,
Right.
they have friends, they have others. So, but when you recruit from within or discover from within and release them into ministry, this is their home. This is their church. Often we led them to Christ and baptized them. They don't really know
Mhm.
any other church or any other way. They have
Yep.
no idea that they're involved in something that's different than anywhere else. So listening to what God has said to people and then helping them accomplish what God said, I think that's a beautiful picture. So our staff, at one point or another, one of my greatest team members, he pastors one of our campuses. My first memory of him was we were on a marriage retreat and walking down the beach in Traverse City. We see this couple off in the distance coming towards us. Get about half the distance, I recognize one of the guys is smoking. Get a little bit closer, and I realize it's this young couple from the church. And he's got his hand behind his back, and smoke is coming out from behind him. And he thinks he's fooling me because he doesn't want his pastor to know that he smokes. He had quit smoking cigarettes, to his credit, but now he was smoking cigars, which makes no sense. It's like I'm going to quit listening to secular music, so I'll listen to country western. I had no idea what the logic is of that, but that was his logic at the time. But I had no idea. He had no idea. I was looking at an integral partnership, a Paul Timothy relationship. I had no idea. But on that retreat, decisions were made and questions and over coffee and, the three circles and ministry and youth sponsoring. And then he became a part-time and then a full-time. And now he basically senior pastors one of our locations. That I guess the neat thing about this is I say this the right way, but if I ask you to serve somewhere in my church because in the factory of people, I need another line worker to take this responsibility or the cars don't get built. In a way, I've asked you to do something you're not created to do. And in a way, I owe you a favor if you do it. If I discover that you're actually an engineer and I give you a pencil and a piece of paper and you draw the new tailgate for the Chevy truck that turns into a desk, you'll never forget that I was the one who discovered it. In some ways, you owe me a favor. We're
Yeah.
accomplishing the same thing, but we're doing it completely the opposite. So I think fundamentally, a lot of us are educated in classroom settings. We're educated, but we're not necessarily discipled. And I'm not saying you can't be discipled in college. You certainly can be. But
Right.
I think, we preach sermons hoping for results. And you hear me say this a lot, but if you're going to spend 20 hours on a sermon, I think you're wasting about 15 hours. And this is for me, after decades of preaching, I would be wasting 15 hours. My sermon is not noticeably better after 20 hours than it is after 5. It may be better, but I would rather take those 15 hours and sit down over coffee or a meal or take a walk with some person who's new to the church or new to the faith and ask them, what did God save you from? What do you believe God saved you for? And if they say, I don't know, to ask them the 3 questions, draw some circles, introduce them to somebody that's already doing what they told me they want to do. And the wheels on the bus go around and round and the kingdom of God grows. And it's so rewarding. There is no greater payday in my life than someone finding Christ. But second to that is when someone finds out what Jesus meant when he created them, who they're supposed to be. That is, I don't need to get paid that week. I am compensated in full when someone discovers and they come to me and say, man, I got to spend time in the special needs ministry with these kids. And I'm like, you ran towards something most people run from. And through a series of questions, that ministry was created. And now you're a part of it. We didn't have a special needs ministry for years. And then we had 3 people that were fully dedicated. We now have like a dozen, they told me. In the last year, another group of people have just one by one committed to it because they discovered through these questions. So we have overstaffed ministries. Here's something that's interesting. Unless you're paid, you're not allowed to serve more than twice per month at our church. So you cannot be the nursery lady that gets stuck there. You cannot be the bass player every week on that platform.
Yeah.
You cannot be the youth sponsor. Unless you get paid, which is that you do it every week, then you are not allowed to serve more than twice per month because, and it's not because we don't want you to serve, it's because there's other people that want to serve too. And we have to make room for everybody to serve. One of our biggest problems is finding room for everybody who wants to serve to serve. Isn't that nuts?
That's a great problem. And and the beautiful thing is it started small. You know, you didn't come to Fenton and in 3 weeks you had this full blown, this all figured out. No, it's developed over years, and but it starts with a small step or two in the direction. I think it really starts with buying in to the idea that look, I'm never probably going to be able to staff properly by reaching outside my walls. Now, does that mean you never reach outside your walls? I don't think so. We're not trying to be that way. What we're saying is, look, it's going to be for the near future, at least, it seems that it will be getting harder to find staff outside of your church. So let's take that under advisement and start to begin a process of discovery and development and releasing people into their God-given why. And I've noticed this, that when people are serving in their God-given why, in the intersection of, and we're going to talk more about this next week, their passion, their pain, their proficiency, they hardly need any management. They show up early. They show up prepared. They show up prayed up. And probably the problem you will have with them is corralling them a little bit when they get so excited about what they're doing that they start to maybe move too fast with certain things. I would take that problem every day of the week.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's just beautiful, Jim, what the Lord has allowed you to discover and do. You know, next week we're going to get really practical with what this looks like in action. But just two things I want to have you finish up with, and then I'll wrap us up. What are maybe some basic thoughts our listeners could grab onto today? That's the first thing I'd like you to answer real quick. And then I'd like you to talk about the cohort that we are launching. This is not our first launch of this type of cohort, but a cohort that we're launching around this effort to help pastors learn how to build from within. So, Jim, could you answer those two questions for me?
So you mentioned Lifeway Research. The number one thing pastors are saying is I can't seem to find workers, especially post-COVID. There was a level of commitment that really, you might have noticed, dropped off after COVID. Good people, new people, but a lot of our regulars decided to kind of step back a little bit. And so they're saying the number one thing they're dealing with, 76% say the number one thing is this: I can't find the right people. But I don't think we know or have noticed is on the other side, when asked, how do I get more meaning or purpose in my life? They said, how often you ask yourself the question, how do I get more meaning or purpose in my life? There are 15% of the people, 1 out of 7, that said, I think about it about every month. There's another 21%, so we're up to 36%. 1 out of 3 say, I think about it every week. 1 out of 3 people think about it weekly to monthly. But there's another 21% that say, I think about it every day. Every day, I think about how do I get more purpose and meaning in my life. Well, that's, 57? Almost 6 out of 10 Americans saying, how do I get more purpose in my life? While 76% of pastors are saying, I need more workers. I'm telling you, there's a marriage of these two things. The church should be the place where dreams are dreamt and actions are taken and souls are fulfilled and challenges are accepted and mountains are climbed and things are pioneered. So when we say we need more workers in our factory to build what we value, which is more people, more dollars, more programs, stop. People are tired of being used by their local church. I'm saying this is kind of crude language, but they're tired of being used by their local church to produce what only the local church or the pastor seems to value. It's shocking, but on most Sundays, the pastor may be the only person in the room that literally wants their church to grow. So how do we help people become part of the answer, not part of the problem? How do we help shepherds come in and meet people where they are? It's this thought of purpose. If you will help people discover their purpose in life, their God-given, God-created purpose in life, by asking them simple questions, spending some time with them, and preparing them to release them, not recruiting them to be your worker, releasing them to be who God made them to be, it is shocking what can happen. So that is my thought, and this is what we're doing in our cohort. Is it's limited to 10 people. We snuck in at 11th this last time, but 10 people where we spend, it starts September 17th, Converge on the website there, convergecoach.com/cohorts. Or just go to convergecoach.com, click on all the information is there. Every other Tuesday, starting September 17th through about Christmas time, we're going to meet, and I'll spend 4 weeks teaching on the inspiration of this. I've had this conversation 100,000 times now with individuals and groups, over 100,000 times now. So all of that experience, taught it in the public school. It's being taught in the jails. It's being taught in Mongolia. It's being taught in Cuba, Mexico. The devotion, everything begins with purpose, is on the Bible app now. It's a 5-day devotional. It's now translated in Indonesian. That they're using this in Indonesia now. So this is not some theory. This is a tested thing, and we're going to spend 8 weeks. 4 weeks I'll be teaching on this, and then 4 weeks we're going to bring in people like we're going to have on our show 2 weeks from now. Jim Westheim is brilliant. He has done a wonderful job taking the inspiration and creating application and creating culture at the church level. In a town, John, of 3,000 people, they have over 220 workers and about between 600 and 800 people attending weekly. In a town of, what is that? 1 out of 4 people from the community. They have people driving for 45, 50 miles to get to this church because this church helped them discover who God made them to be, and they get to be that there. You know how many churches they're driving past to get to West Branch? Yeah. It's shocking. So we're gonna talk about this. I'll give you all my notes. You get access to everything I've written. There's a video seminar that's included with it that you can take to train your leaders. And of course, Converge, we're always going to help you any way that we can to accomplish this. So it's like, good idea. How do I do it? We'll talk about the practice next week. But even beyond that, we're going to be, again, a small group of people. And if it fills up, we'll do a second small group, a third small group of people. But we want to help you implement this, because this is, in my mind, a huge missing piece in the average, most often hardworking, doing the best we can pastor's life. And we want to help you fill that void.
Well, Jim, I'm so grateful that this God has given you this life message. And that he connected us in such a random way. Many years ago, I stopped by to drop off a book, one of my books, and we talked for about a half hour, and it was, I don't know, it just seemed like we're going to be friends at least. And I never thought we would get to work together, but it's just been wonderful to see in the last 6 or 7 years what was in your heart to take what was happening in your home church and broadcast that to a larger audience. And we've had many ups and downs over the years trying to figure out, God, how are we going to do this? God, how can I help Jim? And I'm not taking any credit for it. All I wanted was to see this thing take off, and it is taking off beautifully. And it's so amazing. And we want you who are listening and watching to experience the power of this in the congregation that you lead. Reach out to us at convergecoach.com. You can click on the cohort tab and find out more information about the cohort. Dates, times, and registration is available to you there. If you're listening today and you just say, hey, I'd like to spend 30 minutes with Jim talking about this, you just click on the contact us link, and Jim will give you 30 minutes free, and he'll explain this to you. Hopefully you'll jump into a cohort where you can learn from him and learn from other leaders who are figuring out how to implement this. Everything we do here at Converge Coaching, we're always thinking about how do we help you lead better and lead longer and have more fun along the way. And today is no exception. So if you're listening, we want you to know we're proud of you. We admire what you do for a living. We know that there are tremendous joys in serving in the capacity of pastor, and there's also tremendous challenge. And so we want to encourage you today to keep fighting a good fight, keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't do this alone. Don't do this alone. And we're cheering for you, we're rooting for you, and we're praying for you as you continue to lead from alignment.